So actually there's no separating the book from the author. Though we would like to, so we should, as readers, kind of keep the author separate from the book we are reading. Sometimes it's useful to know a little bit about the author, how they came to write the book she's already getting tips that they wrote. So one of the questions I had was...
Before that, how do you know I won't lie? You just started with a line.
Yes. So
as long as it's interesting, we have no
as long as it's entertaining. Another thing is, if you guys want to ask questions, please feel free. It's very fun. It's not usual. The first question was, we are a culture that values the role of the guru, that acknowledges them. So I was wondering if you'd like to say a little bit about some of the defining influences in your writing. So the question was, who are some of the defining influences in her writing?
Influences you mean in terms of other writers?
Other writers, maybe an instructor, maybe teachers, it could be school. What kind of set you off?
Yeah, we write and we think we know what we are doing, we know what we are writing, what we want to write. But I do believe a guru comes across when the time is right for you. And my guru is right here. Priya Sarupet Priya. She made me face my writing, confront my writing. She helped me to actually understand whether what it was I wanted to do with the writing, what kind of stories I wanted to tell. She made me aware of my strengths and weaknesses, most often the strengths. Okay, don't fall. Most often the strengths. So that gave me a lot of confidence. It also told me whether I really wanted to be a writer. No, till then I was dabbling in it. But it's her faith in me, the way she kept guiding me, that led me towards writing and taking it much more seriously. So I owe that very much to her. She's my guru in that sense. And Anil won't escape this.
Oh God.
Because he nudged me in a different direction. He would come back with these very wacky, weird comments, feedback on my stories. And that usually, pushed my stories into different directions also, which always worked very well.
So one question, a follow-up question I had was, how did you meet Priya? Was it through a workshop? Was it through social?
Yeah. I attended a workshop that she was doing a master class in writing. That's where I met Gargi too.
Okay.
I'd known about Gargi all along, but I didn't know I would meet her, in a writing workshop. And that's when I know the first day, we had submitted stories in order to be selected for the class. And she called me away from the class at the end of the first evening. And she grilled me on the story that I had submitted, okay? And I had no clue how to respond. So I wasn't a writer as yet, I was just about dabbling in writing. I liked what I was doing. I thought I was doing a great job, which I obviously wasn't. Her questions told me that. But yeah, so that first evening when she asked me questions about my story, that set me thinking about the very process of writing. I wasn't quite thinking about it all along.
Okay. So you at that time you had been writing for a while.
I had been writing for a while, but the Oxford collection was also out.
After that?
Yeah, so this was after that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Feynman said was a lot of mathematicians go into physics thinking that, this is just math, I can crack it. But he says that when he said that to do physics, you gotta have style, right? It's not just the math. I think one of the things we learn from gurus is it's a way to be.
Yes.
And I think anyone who's worked with Priya knows that you have a certain a certain style, right? A certain way to be. Gargi, my question is for you.
Can I just ask a...
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, Sucharita and I were together in the Department of English, and so the question for you as a student of English literature, this is a former one, is when you look back at your work, first of all, do you look back at your work?
I'm forced to.
Because very often, there are these actors who say that once they've acted in a movie, they don't want to see it again, unless they're forced to in a premiere. So that was part of the question. But uh, when you look back, are there traces or elements that you see reflected in your work that go back to the things that you might have read in the Department of Education? Let's sort of follow up on the question that Anil asked in the beginning. Is there anything that you can see? Because I read this interesting article by Malcolm Gladwell on plagiarism, and he made a very interesting point that sometimes that happens, but it's completely unconscious in music and in literature. But are there any places where you can see those influences coming?
Yeah, I would. No, I don't think any of us can escape the plagiarism in the sense of it, not in the actual doing of it. You know, what
I'm
is
not
so
talking about it
meaningful?
purely as plagiarism, but just
No, I get, yeah. Uh, no, maybe not from the MA or MPhil lit days, but what you read in others, I always see Mahashweta Devi's stories as, giving me that nudge. Very often, in fact, one of the stories here is almost like a tribute to the themes she takes up to write, or or the way she locates her characters within a given situation. So I guess, yeah, that does influence me, and that social consciousness also, that influences the writing. Not necessarily what I have learned earlier, because when you're writing, you're not really thinking of those. If it seeps into my writing, then that is for the reader to tell me. I won't be aware of it. So,
and see, and again was saying that you have changed the writing style, it is matured.
yeah.
So looking back, what would you say are the chief differences between how you started and how you are now? Or what do you think is working, or what do you think is not working so well that you perhaps need to work on?
Yeah, earlier it was more, my emotions at that time.
So,
My emotions at that time. So I used to try and impose my emotion on the story. Now I've moved away from that. Now, without even knowing it, my story leads me. So that is a very big difference, and that has changed the way I write stories, or the way I think about the characters.
So a greater trust in the story.
Yeah, being led by that, by the story, by the characters.
Therefore, in
Yourself.
and the process of writing.
That I can be led. I don't think I had that confidence earlier. I wanted to push it in the way I saw it. So that has changed now.
so what do you like about your work? If you had to say something.
That it grows organically.
Interesting.
I rarely ever step in as the writer. I always feel that, I'm being led, I'm being guided. Of course, I impose myself later when I'm editing, but that would be after many, many drafts, not in the initial drafts.
And what do you not like about your writing?
That's not a fair question.
So-
You don't love her.
There are some things that are private, of course. But the things that you can share. Where would you
I lack
like to
humor.
go that you
I
haven't
lack
gone?
humor.
Yeah.
I lack humor.
Sure. Yeah, I'll quarrel with that.
one-
Yeah, but yeah. Go
I
ahead.
just, it occurred to me for the last question. Does the fact that you are being an editor interfere with you, right? With your sense
It
of-
does. It does. It does.
Yeah.
I sometimes I edit much more than required. So it's quite difficult to balance the writer and the editor at times.
Yeah.
Sort of find yourself looking over your own shoulder.
All the time.
You're being too analytical and hard on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. The hard part of it.
Again, the question that I had for you was, you work with computers a lot, obviously, but I wouldn't call you an IT person, any means. Practically every other person you meet on the road today is an IT person. So first of all, how did you escape that fate? And secondly, why did you escape that fate? What were the decisions that kind of led you to take up the graphic arts as, and go to, when you start this nonsense with drawing and so on?
My twist with drawing. Okay. Yeah, so at school it was very interesting. I did all of the serious sciences, okay, and I did art
Ah.
because I didn't like the dissection. So I wanted to escape biology. So I had to take a subject. Thankfully, ICSE allowed us to take on, subjects of our choice, and I took up art. Though there was some clash with the math, because math students are not supposed to do art. Okay, But my art teacher allowed me to spend extra time in the art room.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that I did art and I loved every minute of it,
Yeah.
and I taught school. So it left me in this big confusion. Now, what am I going to do? And my parents, I think, were far more confused. But my art teacher, I mean, a guru comes along,
Yeah.
okay, and she said, why don't you try for architecture? Because that was a known field in
So
those
that's
days.
like combination. Yeah.
Accepted.
Yeah.
Okay. So I said, okay, let me try for architecture. And then she said, and there is this very interesting design school. One of our senior students once went there. You might want to look at it. So, okay, to heck. I mean, let's just give it a try. I applied for that exam. I got through. I came for the interview. I fell in love with the campus.
This is Ahmedabad.
This is in Ahmedabad, NID. That was at that time the only design school in our country. Now, of course, we have too many in every city. But yeah, that's how design happened to be.
How long? It's like a 3-year program, 4-year program.
5.5 years.
5.5 years.
Integrated masters.
Yeah, yeah.
In those days, it was a diploma. Now we have an equivalence, so I have an MDes.
Yeah. And you still teach there, right?
I go back every year to teach for 2 weeks.
Ah.
It's my thing for my alma mater. I
Okay.
must do it.
Okay.
And I love going there and refreshing myself. It's so wonderful being with the young energy, young minds,
Okay.
It just recharges me so totally.
Wonderful. We'll get back to a little bit about the design process in the cover, especially. But for now, I like to shift to the collection itself. So, Sucharita, here's a relatively easy question. How long has the collection been in the making?
Oops, that's not easy. The first story was written in 2007.
So it's about 10 years.
So a few of these stories have been already published, and there are some new ones here. So over a decade, I have written and rewritten these stories. I have rewritten the stories which were published. So that's where the editor angle comes in. You keep working on it. Even now, if I go back to it, I think I'll
Fiddle with it, right? Yeah.
I'd like to do that. I'm still not happy with many of these.
Yeah.
But yeah, roughly a decade perhaps,
Yeah.
till the most recent story which I included just before sending it off. I mean, in the final draft actually.
So the complete, when you say the stories are complete, you feel reasonably complete.
Reasonably complete.
So that happened to you.
I don't think I can ever say a story is complete.
Right. So some stories must have been more problematic than others, right? I get, for example, the film The Rear View came very easily, but some of the other stories might have taken longer. So which story gave you the greatest difficulty? Which flowed and which one was really difficult?
No, Rare View wasn't easy either. The easiest story was the one I wrote in maybe 2 hours. That's in the final draft after the publisher sent the draft to me for just to look at
Yeah.
it once. When I said, no, I'll put in this story now. So that was written over 2 hours. But Fire I first wrote in 2007 when Nandigram,
Yes.
the violence broke out there. And at that time, it was just my immediate response to the violence. I was so badly shaken up, so frustrated, scared with what was happening, angry. I think all of those emotions poured into the story, and it seemed to make no sense. I remember sharing it with Kamlakar, he's here, and he said that it's wonderful and it's nice and raw, but I knew that the story hadn't really worked out. And I kept coming back to Fire, but I couldn't find the right way to tell that story because I was still very, I think, caught up in that, the emotions. And from 2007 till 2012 or 13, when the story was first published, it was a very long and very painful process to keep, going back to it. And I needed that distance in time.
Okay. So was it emotional work or was it like getting
The
find the
initial
right
drafts.
words to say?
No, the initial drafts, because then what I was doing, I realized, was that I was making the characters behave in a certain way, respond in a certain way to the situation. I wasn't letting them tell their story.
Okay.
But it's when I could stand away from the story for almost 2 years, I did not return to the story, but it was there in my mind all the time. So when I finally went back to it, I realized that now the characters are ready with their story. So I didn't need to impose myself at all, and the story turned completely. I think it was a 360-degree.
Interesting. As like Priya was saying, you also have grown as a writer.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes you find that you're not ready to write a story,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Even though you have the idea, you have the desire, but you're not ready yet.
Yes, you're not ready. You may be able to put down the words, but those words may not really tell the story that you want to tell. And I also think it's very difficult to sit down as a writer and say, this is the story I want to tell and this is how I want to tell it. So you have to let the story teach you. It's very humbling that way. I keep because I'm a mother, I keep thinking of it as bringing up a child. You cannot predetermine how your child is going to grow up, how you are going to mold her life. It's just not done, not possible.
That's interesting that you use the image of the maternal image with a child. I was thinking more of a puzzle. You have to solve that puzzle. With a lock and key.
You'll be surprised the key keeps getting lost.
Yeah. Nothing gendered about it.
Yeah, please.
I mean, you've been saying several times about the story leading itself, the characters speaking, and this is something that's been for many years in my head from Toni Morrison's Beloved, where the characters come and speak to her. But you are the writer. So the characters emerge from you. They're not. How does a character have his or her or their own life? Because in the end, it's you. You are the writer.
So you're asking if it's just a way of speaking rather than.
Yeah, I know that. I understand that. But do you mean that you have managed to put yourself enough into somebody else's, into the characters, and then you can see them as whoever that character is, and not Sucharita speaking through the character?
I think there's no other way.
Yeah.
At least for me personally, I think there's no other way.
So how does that? I mean, is it an entirely intuitive process, or does that happen? Is there something that you can tell a writer, or that your guru told you that this is one way, something that you could do which would help you to reach this stage?
I don't think you can teach that to any writer. Could you, Priya? I would put that question to you. Could you teach that to any writer? I would find it difficult to think so.
I think I've always said this, just sink into that particular moment, that particular situation or that emotion. And that, or that experience, so that you go down and then the character rises. So it's a simultaneous one going down and one going up. And if the person can't bring themselves to do it, if they can't in a sense lose control enough to let that happen, I don't think a successful story can be made of it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. But I remember this weird story that I was writing in which the character was somebody who lived on a boat all year round, and I personally can't swim. I knew nothing about boats, so I began writing the story about this guy, and eventually I remember I even ended up taking classes on sailing, and I'm going to tell my wife things like, why are we living with all this stuff? We should simplify our life. And she's just waiting for the story to get over. Because it was one of the weird things with your personality changes a bit. That's happened several times.
I think that as Suresh would keep saying, when I embark on a long project, and I think this happens to the partner of all writers, that they seem to be away. They're just not there. And the other person has to cope with this being person around but not around,
Yeah, interesting.
So I think we all need
Visible, invisible.
to.
So is this kind of schizophrenia that's involved in writing? It's purely non-medical, it's not creative.
So actually, I wanted to sort of dwell upon this a little more.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah.
The negative capability of
Yeah.
your empathy with the writer and all that. One can understand these as concepts, you know. But is it really possible that a fictional character has complete autonomy? Can a story write itself? I don't know. It's all you're doing it only probably in the field of speculative fiction, when there is something where your personal experience doesn't really matter. You know? It is purely coming out of your mind. Everything else is the way we've been conditioned by society, by our parents, you know, by what we have read. And just like I said, the critic sometimes comes in the way of the writer. You know, it's the same person that sort of encompasses both of them. Similarly, a student of literature also, ideally imagining that the student of literature has read enough literature, is also hampered by the fact of, "Arey yaar, ye to usne likha tha." You know, I've seen this earlier, and there's this constant struggle to come out with something quote unquote original. Now that concept itself is kind of under a cloud now, you know.
Yeah.
So all these things that I had the story in my mind and it wrote itself. I've heard this. I am in love with the idea, but I'm not quite convinced that it can happen.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a mystical thing, and I think it's very true with many of us. I can't find the words to really explain that, but it's the you were working on this collection, speculative Ramayana.
Yes.
Remember
Yeah.
breaking the bow, and I remember a friend called up and she said, you know, the deadline is tomorrow, and I was very keen on giving to the collection, to the anthology, and I didn't have a story ready. And I wrote it overnight. I sent it to him, and I knew very well it's not going to be accepted. Okay, but that story told itself. You know, I don't see where my agency was involved there. I felt like my hand was being moved in a particular direction. My mind was being moved. It's a very mystical experience, and I don't talk about it because it's very difficult to convince the other person that this happens. So I would not put that
Yeah,
away.
yeah. I think as
I would
readers,
be
we
wary
fall
of
into a
putting that
trance, right? When we read.
But
Maybe
even
writers
there
too.
in this collection, for instance, there are different voices, but there is something similar in all the stories. I hear your voice in all the stories.
Hmm.
There are like phrases which you have very
Yeah,
lovingly, I
yeah,
feel you have gone back to them and very lovingly carved them. There are some phrases which are written down because they're so beautiful. And they're in different stories.
Huh.
So I think there's a combination. And the character is taking over some, but there is you who's sort of polishing that story.
That you
and
comes
bringing
at the
it
end.
to growth.
That you comes right at the end when I'm editing. Then yes, I look at every word, every sentence, again and again and again. So I might have the kernel in the first few drafts, but what you find is the chiseled product. Yeah.
She had a question, I think.
Yeah, I think just like adding on to all of these, from so then how do you go about writing a character who's radically different from you? Like it's such a like hypnotic, introspective. It's like the meditative process writing, and then parts of you come out. But say like if I want to write like a misogynist redneck type, like I want to learn how to do that. But when I you know zoom into myself, I'm probably not going to find this character there. So how does one go about, immersing oneself in characters that are radically different from oneself?
I would throw that question open to Priya. She has a book called Generation 14. It's very difficult to. You cannot be that character. So how did you go
Well,
about that?
that's in the 24th century. But first, before that, I'd like to, because you're also a cinema person, I'd just like to bring in a friend, a common friend of ours. He was a director called Mani Kaul, who made art cinema. And he talked about the process of filmmaking as sleepwalking. So you are going through space and time, you are doing things, but you're also sleepwalking. You're not functioning with your the logic of the everyday is not what guides you. There is a different logic, an internal system that is significant. But this 24th century and a character you don't like, that is, I think, much easier to write a character. Okay. You don't like them on your life, It's like, it's in a way easier to write sadness than happiness. Because when you're thinking about a character, what that character does, or that kind of cluster of emotions you find. You see this person forming, you might not know the face, but you know the other half of it. And they'll speak the same way. Don't you agree? I mean, there are lots of writers here in this room. I know.
There
So-
are
So,
Actually, so wondering whether the way to unify these views is that there is this conscious part of you as a writer, and there is this unconscious part of you. And when you say that the characters are shaping themselves or forming themselves, maybe that's because it comes from an unconscious rather than a overtly conscious part. And going back to that untold creative sleepwalking, what you're engaging with in some sense is an alternate reality. It's kind of blind process because you cannot be consciously in control.
Yes.
You're just drawing from this well. It's very far below the surface. You're pulling up a bucket, but what comes from the bucket, though it's pulled up by you, comes from the well. Something like that.
Yeah, and I think the word as you said mystical, right? I think you're a little embarrassed by those words today, and it might actually just be that,
Another word which we are sort of maybe embarrassed by is dialectic,
Right.
where things do get unified, reconciled, they're opposites.
Right.
Through a
right.
process, through a certain passage of time.
You can't always verbalize it,
You can
perhaps.
be both
Yeah.
your character and yourself,
Yeah.
and they can be the
Right.
same thing, just worse.
In fact, I think the first story in the collection, it kind of speaks to that because it's called Half a Story, and it's incomplete as expected. Now,
Just related to this.
Please,
So
yeah.
I actually don't have a problem. So I haven't visited by this spirit as yet, but I totally believe in the spirit of meditation. But like in meditation, do you know the one like you're sitting and sitting and sitting, and you know it's not happened, and then you know the moment when it's happened. In writing, do you know when that has happened?
It just happens, I think.
And you know,
Yeah, I think-
and you know what
Just-
it was, but that's not you.
It just clicks, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going one stage further. I've written a book, the first one. When I read it now, I feel I've not read it, I've not written it.
Interesting.
I don't know where it's come from. I sometimes don't think, realize
Yeah.
it's me that's written it.
Yeah.
But it's me.
I-
So sorry.
I'd just like to add on this, though it's taking away from the writing as a core activity, but I think this is true of any creative art.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is you just immerse yourself,
Yeah,
you are lost in there, and something emerges somewhere.
Whatever.
And somewhere maybe, the plagiarism, it's coming from your subconscious, all of that is happening, it is at play. But sometimes, it's a wonder, where did I think of that idea?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Was it really?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder how was it to me?
Right. Right. I
Yeah,
remember-
you surprise yourself
Yeah.
because it's from so deep in there. So you just have to immerse yourself, and you know when it's there. You do.
Okay, let's take one more.
Yeah, so I like this word, mystical dialectic. So let's push on this a little further. For the people who are here who don't consider themselves as creatives, can these things be taught? Can they be learned? How does one put oneself in a position that's fertile to accept the dialectic, that understands the mysticism without being a part of it? How does one, as a teacher, teach this to people who are not, as they are active members of the dialectic?
You can't teach this.
So do you accept that fate, and you're like, yes, this is outside me, and as a person, I am condemned to this life outside the dialectic?
No,
If I may just say, wanting to do something, desiring it so much, takes you half the way. The rest is many other
Right.
things, it's skill,
Yeah.
luck, or something inborn in you. But wanting it badly, to persist,
Desire.
Yeah.
it's a very good start.
Yeah.
You run half the race.
So I'll put it in philosophical terms. It's like leprosy. Repeated contact over a long period of time.
I have a comment on this. We meet here every Sunday to write stories, and we write prompts over here on Sunday mornings, and we have to read out whatever we've written. And I'm not a literature person. I've read a lot, but I'm not a literature person or anything. And we write for 40 minutes or so, and then we read out whatever we've written. And often I'm surprised, where did this come from? I mean, this is not me. I have absolutely no idea what it is. some of them are scary stuff I'm writing, some of them I just have no idea. Not always, but often it has, like, I have absolutely no clue. But it was given to me that I have to write within 40 minutes. I know there's an audience of 5-10 people who I have to read it out to. And
in fact, the thing that it leads actually to this point that I wanted to make, which was that in this particular collection, you get the sense of somebody who is in with great control, rather than and very little that is accidental. You know, when you read it, you get the sense that even though the initial impetus might have been intuitive, emotional, the first draft, and so on, but later on, there's a great sense of control that you have crafted the sentences, right? So I want to read the first few lines of her story, half a story. It goes like this. When I taught in a night school for the children of prostitutes and pimps, I thought social mores had a universal virtue, an all-encompassing benevolence in one's life of providing hope and security. So you have a person who is leading a normal life with a certain faith in the world, right? But then you're also told that this is a world in which you have the children of pimps and prostitutes. And this ordinary person spends her evenings teaching these kids, right? And that she has a certain faith in the world. And you know that the story is in a way going to be how that faith is broken. But whether that faith is with herself or with the world, you're not sure yet, right? And the title is called Half a Story. So as soon as you open the book and you have this gift given to you, right? And you know that this is an author who has great control over what she's going to say, right? That this it's a story about suffering and how your faith gets shaken by witnessing this suffering. So is this theme of suffering that I want to talk about. That specifically, it's that many of the stories in this collection deal with human suffering, right? That is all around us, but it's also invisible somehow. As we all know, as Indians, we know that we sometimes have to shut our eyes to the suffering around us, right? But in your stories, this suffering alters the relationships the characters have to themselves and to other people. So my question to you is this. Is there anything that led you to focus on this particular approach? So for example, why don't you just write campus romances? Why don't you check in for that?
I think I'm too much of a moron for that. Okay, you need a particular. It's a very pathological.
It's a certain
kind
way
of
of looking at the
question.
world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, when Natul asked me, I said I can't write humor also.
Yeah.
Okay,
Why?
so that's a weakness, I would say. But coming to relationships, I think I see the world around me through relationships because they give us perspective. Relationships, equations, they give us perspective. They tell us much more about the world and also our position vis-a-vis the world around us. It helps, at least it helps me to look into myself quite a lot. So the suffering is not because a particular relationship is getting affected, but because what that relationship shows you about yourself. You know, this thrusting your face into the mirror, so to say, and whether you blink there. So this talks of security.
Yeah.
We often look for security in our relationships. My question this question that often haunts me is, do these relationships around us give us security? Or is security only the one that you give yourself? You know, for me, that security is looking into the mirror and looking at myself unblinkingly. If I have to blink,
So you like that?
I'm insecure.
Okay.
Okay, nobody around me can make me secure if I don't feel secure within myself. So many of these stories they are suffering in terms of what it does to your mind, to your own opinion about yourself, your image of yourself, how it makes you, keep clawing at the impressions that you have of yourself. So that changes the relationship around you, not necessarily the relationships changing you.
So do you feel a certain amount of, like in Hindi movies, right? You have the poor characters, and their general role is to give the master some enlightenment, right? Choti muh aur badi baat, that kind of thing, right? And they offer some life fundas to the middle class or upper class hero or heroine, right? And do you get the feeling that, aha, there's a rape announced. Let me make it.
What was that
It is
about?
time for my character to get enlightened.
No.
There's no sense of like that you're using the suffering for.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm using it. I'm responding to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
There's no sense that you're over working with the suffering. It's not in.
that's for you as a reader to tell me. Do you get that sense?
Absolutely not.
If you
Absolutely
do, then
not.
I fail.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but when you work in that mode, right? There's a certain amount of like perhaps guilt that comes up when you're looking at it from the outside.
Yeah. Guilt. No, more than guilt, I think it is. What could be the possible responses?
Possible responses to
Responses to it.
Yeah.
So it's not really guilt. It is. Am I able to deal with it?
Ah.
Where do I find? What would I have? I asked this. What would I have done in this given
What you
situation?
did. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So that
Yeah.
comes across even in rare view.
And even if you don't like the answers, you find.
You find yes.
Okay. All right. In fact, there's a lovely review of a collection in scroll.in, and the critic Sikandin had written that her trademark style has all the elements of horror mystery, right? And combining horror and mystery, which I didn't quite agree with, but I think what she meant was that the stories have a touch, or more than a touch, of the uncanny, right? So, for example, in some of our stories, people just disappear for no reason, right? People appear for no reason. You have closed doors that you shouldn't enter. Of course, the character will go through it, but she won't tell you what happened, right? It's very annoying. And several times I wanted to call and ask, like, what happened? And I know that's a wrong question to ask. That's your job, you'll say. So, is this a feature of just this collection or your work in general? Do you have a fondness for horror mystery, as you say?
No, I don't have a fondness for
Yeah.
it. I think it just creeps into the story somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like probing those dark holes and secrets, and maybe trying to find a way
Okay.
by probing
Okay.
or getting into it. It's like you have a wound, you keep picking at it.
That you mentioned also that you like picking at wounds. Yeah.
Did I?
In the biographical note, you said that
Okay,
you
yeah.
pick at the wounds of society. It's like, what a mean person.
I mean, we're really roasting.
Yeah.
By some of your stories, even the weirdness of it or the turns it takes, it reminds me sometimes of Namita Gokhale's Mountain Story,
Mountain stories.
where again you find a weirdness. The houses have a certain character.
Yeah.
People become very weird, and the strange occurrences. In one chapter, it's full of strange occurrences. Or people just seem to turn, and there are unexplained parts of one's character. And this weirdness or strangeness or mystery, I think, is very much part of your writing.
Yeah, it's
And
when
in
I
this
put
collection-
together the collection that I realized that it wasn't conscious.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, bizarre. That's quite bizarre,
I haven't read it, but I have read a few lines being written about the stories. Will it be possible to say that all these bizarre and inexplicable things that happen in the story, and people appearing on the road and disappearing, isn't that also part of magical realism?
It is.
Huh?
Yeah.
It is.
So now I think that is kind of become everyday also, that we have, accepted the fact that not only in forms of writing, but in forms of thinking, in forms of living as well,
Yeah.
one ought to be prepared for something which need not have happened.
Yeah. I think just the quality I noticed, it was clear, was in magic realism, it calls attention to itself, right? Oh, the guy becomes a balloon, that kind of thing, right? Whereas here it's just the ordinary stuff. And you think it's ordinary, and suddenly look at it closely, you find there's really something odd about it, right? That sense that ordinary is nothing like ordinary.
I think also there's something quite relative about the entire process.
Yeah.
Because for years people have been, they were hounding Garcia Marquez, like, wow, it's magical realism. And Marquez always replied saying, this is how I lived. This was happening all around us.
Yeah.
I just gathered them and put them on page.
Right.
So if you are in a the Costa Rican landscape or a Caribbean
This is
landscape
ordinary, yeah.
or a Colombian landscape
Yeah.
where he grew up. You are surrounded
Yeah.
by things that perhaps is wonderful for an American. Wow.
Yeah.
But he, perhaps
Yeah,
imagination
absolutely.
has less to do with it than simply noticing what's going on around.
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah.
And it's very relative, I feel. Yeah.
Sucharita, I'll ask you a very prosaic question. If you were to invite two of your characters for an afternoon with you from your book, which two would you like to spend an afternoon with, and why?
One, I don't have to think also. Savitri from Fire.
Okay.
I'm somehow enthralled of this character somehow. I don't know why. The second one I have to think of a little. They're quite weird, all of them. So, let's spend time.
Who would you be scared of? Who would you not want to have with you?
I would be scared of this Shanta Kaku in Fireflies. Because I still don't know whether she's there or not there.
Yeah, not
I'm
irritating.
quite scared of
Yeah, yeah. In the end, did she exist? What she had go? Okay, anyway, you got to read it for yourself. So when I first got the collection, right, it was called Night Song and Other Stories. Then it became cast out, which is of course how these things happen. But I was wondering about how much information the title conveys to a story, and you're pretty miserly with this, right? So this how important is the title
Why
to you?
miserly?
Because it is. I have to guess. It makes me work, right? And it's you're in fact I like it because it is not dramatic. For example, the story Bulldozer, right? If I was naming it, I would call it something like The Man Who Decided to Live in a Tree, right? Because it is catchy. Who lives in a tree? That kind of stuff. But you deliberately underplay it, and it takes courage actually. Because the thing is in the story and not in the drama of the title and stuff like that. So today you find there's a tendency towards long, grand titles, right? For example, Garcia Marquez's title, I think Memoirs of My Horse or something like that, right? It's catchy. You have to go look at 100 Days of Solitude. So how important does the title come to you after the fact, before the fact?
That's the most difficult part of the process.
Right.
I'm very bad with titles.
Well, it's difficult for all of us.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
I find it especially difficult, and I have to really think and rethink, sift through many titles. It doesn't come very easily to me. For Bulldozer, I wanted it layered because this man also is a bulldozer.
Yeah. Okay. See,
He's
what I
being
mean?
bulldozed
Yeah.
out of his
Yeah.
places, but he's also a bulldozer. What he does later,
Yes. He saves the whole
he
community.
saves
Yeah.
and he loses also a
Loses,
child.
yeah, right.
You are bulldozing your way like
Okay.
others are doing to you. So I wanted that element also to come across.
Okay.
I don't know whether I've succeeded there, but
Is it an important
it's
part for you, the title?
very. The titles and names.
Titles and names.
Names. I cannot start a story if I don't have the name that really works for me.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
So I spend days agonizing over the right name. I look up names, I look up meanings, I look up different kinds of names from all over the world. I think it's
And-
only
and-
when I have the name that I can start.
So you have
the
like an
story.
image of the person as well? Is that?
No,
Ah,
often I don't even know how they look actually. Very often.
okay. So actually that had to do with what they call the paratext, not just the text itself, but the stuff outside it, the margin lengths, the table of contents, the titles, right? And one of the paratexts, the most important paratext you find in a book is the cover, right? And I've always been fascinated by the process of how a book's cover is designed. It's one of the least appreciated or least studied aspects of bookmaking, right? We don't hear much about the book designer, and today we are lucky that Gargi is here to tell us.
No, I'm
exactly.
honored. Sincerely, she invited me, and I said, "Really, you want me there?"
I think it's a very important part of the book. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the process by which you and Sucharita decided to pick this cover.
I think we should talk about the name.
No, before she starts,
Yeah.
when I had Night Song as the title, she heard and she said, "Oh, isn't that too lyrical for the kind of stories you're writing?"
It just didn't work for me. And the good thing is she heard me out, which is very, very unusual. And she actually took it back to the publisher, who agreed. And then we said, okay, now I'm happy with the title that I'm working with. Because it connected. I needed that out. That outward is like key for me. Because I think all stories are talking about somebody who is outside the realm in some way or the other. So, which is why the out stands out.
Or the cast out.
As in the final cover. But yeah, my team did some interesting work on it. So I thought I'd bring some of the sketches and
got
share
yours?
them with
Wow.
you.
Yeah.
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 In fact, I owe this change in title also to Sanjay. He was very, very, very determined that no. This night song doesn't work at all. It sounds very, it washes out the whole collection. And all
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
this is here we started with the night song. It just didn't work. We tried to bring in on all the intensity that we could after having read little bits of the story, but somehow no. Dark, okay, but that's about all that it does to us. No, it didn't work. And then we did quite a few options.
You told them about the photographs also.
Oh yeah, interestingly, I had visited Khajuraho just the month before she came over, so I had some pictures from there. So I said, wow, now I need to bring in tradition. So this was one of the pictures that I finally used. So there were some pictures of mine which came handy. So it was, in a sense,
They
providence.
can't see in that corner. Right?
Oh, okay.
I just told it up. Yeah.
It's right here too, right?
Yeah, I could pass it on.
Yeah.
But then we wanted mysticism. So the real picture did no justice to that. So which is why we treated it eventually. But then let me just share the process. So some of the initial sketches.
Yeah, okay.
A little mystical, imaginary. Another one with a collage.
We were very sure of the fact that the title story cast out,
Yeah.
whatever happens in the end, the actual casting out, that has to be conveyed through the image. So we wanted an empty niche of a temple. That was the...
Yeah. Oops, sorry. Yeah, you can pass them on if you like. Okay. Yeah, so, okay, let me just talk about that. So, yeah, this was one of the initial sketches where we actually had a woman. A woman, not, usually you'd see the woman walking into the temple. Here, the woman was facing you, but she had no eyes. So, a lot of our exploration had women, and then we had this discussion. We said a woman writer, and we don't want to, kind of slot it as a feminist writing because that's not the case. So, in which case it didn't work. So, we wanted that woman touch because this particular story does talk about the woman who's being left out. But how do we bring that? So, this is how it finally worked out. And the swollen sari, yeah, that was my visual clue.
And we didn't want it to be just, people being cast out. We are also doing the casting out. If I'm walking out of a temple, I'm casting you out, right? So we wanted both the...
So this is really the sketch, which was combined with the photograph.
Oh, I didn't see that.
You didn't.
I didn't see this.
So the woman has been subtracted out entirely.
Entirely.
Just the
Just the vermilion. The flow of vermilion was adequate, actually. Yeah, sorry. And then little details like, do we have readability in the back? With reverse text. What fonts we want to use? Do we want black text on lighter color? What works better?
So who made those decisions? Like
We as a design team.
Design team together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's an exciting process, and
how long did it take approximately?
It's quite quick, right?
yeah, I think so.
Within a couple of weeks or so?
Yeah,
2-3 weeks.
3 weeks. Okay.
Start to end.
Just flow, right?
Brief.
He did. He sent me a few designs which I said didn't make me too happy. And I knew that I just had to go to Gargi. And I wasn't willing to listen to anything.
But you were happy with them.
Oh yeah, he's very happy. He's very happy.
In fact, my experience has been that most authors don't like their book designs, their book covers. It's not satisfactory to them because they feel that somehow it doesn't quite capture it, right? But actually, in fact, what happens is you're too close to the work. So you're not the best judge of what the book's cover should be, actually. And the designer who generally works in the image space, they actually have kind of an unconscious idea of this is what the book is about. And very often you can tell a lot about the book from the cover, right? Though the author themselves will say, it doesn't capture it, right? I wanted that actually, right? And in this case, it seems to have come together both ways.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It's also because we were constantly in, we were conversing about it
Yeah,
all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
it helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that a bit louder.
We were talking about it all the time. We kept discussing, each version, and we were open to each other, right? And the publisher was open to all the changes. That matters.
It just worked out together.
It is a
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you read the book before? Did you know about the stories?
I have to be honest, I didn't get a chance to read all of it because there wasn't enough time. But I did glance through it, and now I have read it.
After the design.
After the design, but then I think we worked very well together in the sense she was able to tell me, narrate the stories, and what
Okay.
better than
Yeah.
narration by the
Yeah,
author.
yeah.
At least you knew the story.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So
I
then
don't
I
think
didn't.
it's possible to design without knowing
No,
something
that's
about.
Oh, yeah, otherwise I would. Yeah. Because it's like packaging. If
Yeah.
I don't know what it contains, I
Yes.
can't package it.
Okay.
Sucharita,
Very of course.
I have two
You
questions.
promised. Okay.
You sometimes said that maybe in your days of struggle, you're not a writer till you publish.
I'm still struggling.
Now you're a published writer.
Okay.
So you still hold on to that position that one is not a writer until one is published, or was it just?
That's public perception I was talking about. You're not perceived to be a writer till you have a ISBN. That's what I used to mean.
Yeah.
So people would talk about me as an editor, and I was, I had this craving. I wanted to be known as a writer. So that's what I meant. Now I have an ISBN. That helps, I guess.
One more question. Your writing is sort of driven by certain understanding, certain sensibilities. From what I know of you, you have a social consciousness, you have a political perspective on it. When one writes, I haven't done much of fiction writing at all, but some bit of non-fiction, I cannot help but push forward my agenda. How does one do that when one is writing fiction? Because in a certain sense, one needs to be objective, even about characters one does not like. After all, work of fiction is not propaganda or pamphlet of a party. So how do you deal with that kind of a challenge?
I think distancing. So if you write in the moment, then it might become what you're talking about. But if you distance yourself and you try to come back to it after that initial reaction has subsided or settled, I think then you are more in grip of the matter, more in grip of what you're trying to do without getting into the agenda or politically motivated kind of format.
So was this the challenge you faced when you were writing the story on Nandigram?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I said it took me 6 years, 5-6 years, to get something which would not seem, motivated to show something. Nobody takes any sides in the story. I was taking a side when I first wrote it.
Then you subtracted your ethical position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but how much of that is really possible
Not
when you don't take
completely.
sides?
Not completely. But you don't have to be, so overtly biased also. At least in the way you treat the story, you don't need to be.
Just by way of technique, sorry, Sucharita, sometimes when you're too close to subject, or when you find that the character is becoming, perhaps a tad too close to who you are, do you find yourself very deliberately switching to second or third person? Because I've sort of done that and the reverse at times, where I've switched to first person to, give that sense of bring myself closer to this person or page. And I've switched completely when I felt it was getting too much like me, or it was a thing I'm very passionate about. just to sort of try and see if that sense of distancing can be brought about in a very, very literary manner. But I wonder whether you've sort of done that.
I think we all do that.
Yeah. In fact, several of your stories shift voices.
Yeah. So the story about Complexion, this dark woman, I write that story in the second person. So it universalizes the experience. But towards the end, it shifts to the first person when the response to this universal experience is a very individual one, very personal. I could not use the you anymore in that part of it. So I think we keep doing this for different reasons.
She says it casually, but you can see the amount of technique, right? Yeah.
Somewhat, can I?
Yeah,
A quick question, somewhat related to the last few questions. So while you write fiction, can you really, because the written word is a chronicle of its time, all fiction books has something that chronicles, the society or people, politics, whatever, of those times. And do you consciously try to sneak in some of those things? Because then this will remain as a historical representation of that period. Do you do that, or it just happens to get, become part of the story?
Did you get that feeling? I don't think I do that very consciously or deliberately. So if I'm writing about Nandigram, I don't really get into Nandigram.
Mm-hmm.
It's a representative story in many ways.
So it's a perfect time to ask this question. Like your rear view. Something happened with rear view regarding the chronicle of times.
Yeah.
So what happened in the story of rear view? In rear view, to put it very briefly, it's a story of a woman who asks for help and doesn't quite get it. So
It's actually the story of a journalist who is this very high-flying kind of elitist kind of a journalist who thinks she has a very strong social conscience, and she writes about it. So she sees herself as a journalist activist, and she writes about women, she writes about rape, she writes about all the social issues, about riots and how they are politically manipulated. So she writes about all this. But she thinks she knows the world around her, but she lives in a colony where she doesn't know her own neighbors. And this was the pivot for this was a rape. I wrote the story sometime in 2008, I think, and I just kept it away. I shared it with 2-3 friends, and I kept it away, which I usually do with my stories. I let them stew for months together, sometimes years also. And then a friend of mine calls up from Bombay, and she tells me that, Suchu, what you've written in the story has actually come true. And she was referring to the Pallavi Purakayastha rape and murder. And it shook me. It unnerved me completely. I still feel that when I talk about it. I remember I just sat down and I tried to digest everything. The rape had occurred on the same floor as mentioned in my story. And it was very unnerving. I could not read the story again for a long time. Then I came back to it, and as I was writing, the Nirbhaya case happened. So again I kept it away, because I somehow couldn't get it, I wasn't doing justice to whatever I was seeing around me at that time. I kept it away again, came back to it later, and then I tried to tell it through this journalist's experience. And looking into the mirror, she looks into the mirror at the end of the story because she doesn't know her neighbors also. And here she's talking about being an activist, of writing about issues and stuff like that. So if you talk of chronicle of the times, yes, that's a chronicle of how we behave now. In that way, yes. But nothing, what struck me was now when this book has been published, we again have the Kathua case. So nothing seems to change. You're chronicling an ongoing condition.
It's a blurring of actual and fiction.
Yeah.
So, in fact, thank you for leading to the next question. Which is that
Welcome.
reality actually seems to be, in a way, we need to suspend our disbelief when we live these days, right? It seems so bizarre. The world has become so strange, right? Not just socially or politically, even technologically, right? As if we are living in science fictional times. Also living in medieval times, in other words. Reality itself has become a little fictional. So this question is a really difficult one, which is that what do you see the role of stories in such an age? When reality itself has become a little fictional. It's a real tough one. You don't have to. I'm not saying you have to have an answer, but I mean, you say my response to it was to write a story, right?
Yeah. You also say truth is stranger than fiction, but I think fiction explores. Truth, I think, is capricious. Fiction helps you to explore, go into those dark
So
corners.
truth is capricious.
Fiction gives you possibilities, which I don't think truth really gives you. So fiction will go into a corner and a probe and draw out, and it's that drawing from the well. And it tells you these are the options available of how we react, how we
Respond.
respond to things. I don't know how to respond to your question beyond that.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that bothers me also.
How exactly?
So I think I will stop at that, unless others have more questions. Yes.
I had something that I want to ask. I found it very interesting that quite different from most writers of Indian writers of English. Your stories don't have a particular region or community that you talk about. There's one which is like about Aji Azoba, sort of a Konkan old house. Sometimes you're a Bengali, sometimes you're a Bihari tribal. I found it very different. I find all Indian writers base themselves in some context while I find your stories. So do you think that was conscious, or was that because you are like that you're a Bengali, you're married to Maharashtrian, you live in Pune, and you know, like we are all becoming more
from all over the place. Yes.
So are we becoming more pan-Indian, and is that what is reflected? I found that something very different from other Indian writers.
Honestly, I didn't think. Very often I can't place my stories in a particular, very narrow setting, because they speak beyond that. So I try consciously to refrain from giving a particular setting. Nothing more than that.
Oh yeah, this is one story here. In fact, I think it's very clear they are in the Sundarbans. She won't mention that word. You know?
That's
The eye story. I think this must be Sundarbans, and I'm flipping through it. It's silence, you know. Yeah. All right. So would you read something for us?
I have a question. So this is not, we've been talking about the content of your stories for a long time. My question is more about the process. So you have two identities. You are an author and you are an editor. And I'm very interested in knowing how these two personalities, these two identities cohabit in your mental space.
Don't even ask me that.
Because you did mention about looking over your shoulder, but that is just one aspect to it. Because though these two personalities, these two identities work in the same space with the same artifacts, they actually have very different psyches. So how do they cohabit?
They clash all the time. And I think I have to stay away from my stories, put away the writer for the editor to come to it. There's no other way. Otherwise, what I do is when I'm writing also, I'm editing, I'm writing and editing at the same time. And often that is detrimental to the story itself.
How does your role as an author influence your role as an editor?
In very concrete terms, I understand where the writer is coming from. And I'm able to reach out to the writer by standing in his or her shoes, and when the writer rejects something, I say as an editor, I know where that's coming from. So it helps me, keep crossing over.
Does it ever work the other way around, where you as an author are coming to some other author as an editor, and that author has their own perspective or their own focus or whatever?
So there's dialogue. There's rarely a conflict there. That helps. Yeah.
Because there can be two different authors with that.
Yeah, but then there's a dialogue because you understand or beginning to understand both the sides.
So did you have an editor for these stories?
No.
You didn't?
I wish I had, but my publisher refused to. He said, if you're there, I'm not going to anybody else. And they had to work very fast, so I think giving it to some other editor would have slowed down the process.
Are you kinder to authors now?